Clifton Waters village at Young in East Gippsland owes its beginnings to the vision of one man. The rector of the Anglican parish of Bairnsdale, Canon G.F.D. Smith, was concerned about the need for retirement homes for the elderly. Canon Smith's keen interest and personal drive commenced the project in 1953. The property of Miss A. Martin of Young was acquired by the St John's Church of England vestry for £5,000.
J. Howard Davies, my first husband and I, we were members of the first village council when it was first established by Canon G.F.D. Smith in 1953. We had to raise a mortgage to buy the property, and Canon Smith did go around all over the countryside getting donations from people, and he was even on 3TR promoting the village.
The first cottage was set in the corner of this vast grazing land with an old post and rail fence and was completed by 1954. An elderly Scottish couple, Mr and Mrs J. Richards, were the first occupants.
Mr and Mrs Richards, they heard Canon Smith speaking about it over the wireless, and also it was advertised in The Age. They saw the ad of this retirement village because it was one of the first retirement villages we had. They owned a small property at Pakenham, and they were getting on in years, in their 70s, so they decided, yes, they would like to buy into the cottage here. They were a Scottish couple, very fine, and they were the real pioneers here. Well, the auxiliary was formed in 1954 expressly for helping to finance the running of the village, which they did. They worked very hard. We built 2 cottages, provided the money for the hall and the library, and also sick bay, which it was in those days, and any amenities that was required in the village.
The village had electricity, but the cottages only had rainwater tanks. The water supply was a problem, particularly in the summer months. Water shortages were quite common.
If the wind didn't blow, it wouldn't set the windmill going. The blades on the windmill wouldn't turn, and so Mr Bill Walker used to come over with the water tanker, and he'd get the water from the main water tower in Bairnsdale and fill each tank individually.
Matron Beatrice Hart was the first matron when the sick bay was built in 1957.
The people who were here were very interested in having a bowling green of their own. Well, it was one of those tops covered with old tyres that were ground up, especially for it. But then there was a complaint that if the wind blew, the stuff would blow off. And also it was very hard on their bowls. They more or less abandoned that idea, and then they went into the hall and had the indoor bowls. which appeared to be more suitable.
Howard Davies spent many an hour at the kitchen table designing the commemorative stone entrance to the village. The entrance was a gift made possible by the village auxiliary. It was built by Mr. Alex Ross and unveiled by Canon GFD Smith in 1961.
In the middle of 1950s, it was decided we must have a phone of some sort because we were cut off really from all the amenities and everything around. Well, Miss Martin had the telephone at her place. There was a gentleman who worked for the post office at Bairnsdale, and he was interested in what we were doing, so he provided wire and whatever we required, and told us how to construct this party line from Miss Martin's place to this cottage. But the situation was that it had to be wired to this tree somehow or other. It was quite a thing, but that was only allowed to be used on very urgent cases.
When the Wyong post office closed, they arranged for the mail to come from the Bairnsdale post office. They set up a room in the hall with pigeonholes. Mrs. Jones was postmistress and very strict. She would strike the brass dinner gong to let the residents know that the mail was in. She would let them in one by one into the hall to collect their mail.
She would let them in one by one. No talking, no talking. I can't concentrate.
As the village grew, they had to think about constructing roads.
Previous to the roads we've got now, they were just gravel, all gravel roads. So the curbing and channelling had to be done first. The roads had to be all dug up and it had to rain, didn't it, and all this sort of thing. And this was a big mess. Bob Bosworth organised the sealing of the roads for us. When it came to naming of the roads, the people of the village asked if they could name them the names of the members of the village council. That's how there's Davis Avenue and Stokes Road, and the village council decided on Martin's Parade because we wanted something in her memory.
The community hall has always been the centre of village activities. As the village grew with more and more cottages being built, there became a need to expand the size of the hall. Plans were drawn up and the extension was completed by May the 5th, 1962. The hall and kitchen were again extended in 1986. Councillor Frank Burns asked if they would like the gift of a billiard table. It was a marathon job to install it in the hall. A team of men put the billiard table where it stands today. The residents asked if a library could be included.
People wanted to go for walks, so Walden's Walk was graded around the bottom of the grazing property. It's a sort of a half circle running around Clifton Creek. Mrs. Walden, a member of the village council, and hadn't been here when the streets had been named, so they called it Walden's Walk. That's how it came about.
Clifton Waters Village had by now set a milestone in the care of the aged across Australia. Its success had encouraged government's assistance for similar projects throughout the Commonwealth.
It happened on one Sunday morning when everybody was at church or something or other. They got in the habit of standing on the septic tank inside the main grazing part, and I think this particular steer even laid on it because it was nice and warm and the thing collapsed. They had to get a big crane It took about 2 hours to get the steer out of the septic tank. So that was quite a business. In the early days of the village, we didn't have any finance to work with, so we could call upon a lot of volunteers who offered their help for painting and any manual work that had to be done around the village, which helped us considerably.
Canon Smith left Bairnsdale 5 years after Clifton Waters Village was established. The committee carried on the work. Canon Smith passed away July 29, 1971, and his ashes are placed under the memorial plaque at the entrance to the village. A rose garden was also planted in his memory. It is 1973 and the village celebrates its 20th birthday. The cedar trees lining the village green were planted by Nell and Howard Davies after a trip to Mildura in 1970. They collected seeds from Nell's parents' property, and today's results are being enjoyed by all.
And in this area, when we had Grandparents' Day, we used to have the children's races and pony rides and all sorts of things here.
And the wood shop?
And the wood shop used to be on that area.
Well, they were a very big event.
Oh, a very big event, yes. And they used to love coming each year. They used to love to be invited to come. The members of the social club decided they would like to have something in memory of Princess Diana. It's a flowering gum, a lovely pink one. They arranged to have this planted. As we grew, we were worried about some of the older people living up the hill and finding it difficult. And I suggested at one of our meetings, why not build some units in place of the bowling green?
After unsuccessfully applying for government funding for several years, a small miracle occurred in the form of a legacy left by Mr. Seafield Deutscher. The units were named after Bob Bosworth, an active member of the Clifton Waters Village Council for over 30 years. Mr. Jock McCoy, the supervisor at the time, had the pleasant task of laying the foundation stone for the new Bosworth Court, a project Jock was closely affiliated with since its inception.
Jock and Bud were very much part of the village, and they entered into anything that we were doing and took a real family interest in us.
Clifton Waters Village has seen many celebrations over the years, including the first wedding in 1993. Birthdays play a big part in the social calendar. Trixie Passmore, a resident of more than 30 years, celebrated her 100th birthday in 1997.
We're no longer an old-fashioned group of people because they wouldn't go anywhere unless they had their hats and their gloves on. And I've seen them just go down to a pleasant Sunday afternoon and they'd all be dressed up with their hats and their gloves and their bag, you know. And things have changed such a lot. Even when we first started the village with the village council, it was always Mr. and Mrs. And that was so with the auxiliary. It was always Mrs. for a good many years. And this is something new when we're all by our Christian names. This was one of the retirement village in the whole of the Commonwealth that is situated like this, where people have had their own piece of ground, and it is a unique village as far as that goes. And I think it's been one of the happiest villages there is.